We are beginning beginning to look at chapter 7 in Daniel. I don't know how much we'll get through. If we'll get through all of it, if we'll get into chapter 8, I'm thinking that's maybe ambitious. But we will at least get chapter 7 going here and spend some time in chapter 7. This is the part of Daniel that where there's a big shift from fun Sunday school stories, more or less, to stuff that they just don't that we just sort of ignore in Sunday school. And
making no sense.
To making no sense, Chad says. Well, it does make sense, but we struggle because we're coming at it from our own point of view and our own way of seeing the world and our own way of thinking of Scripture, and it's hard because Daniel is very much Daniel 7 through 12 is very much set in the ancient Near East, and is really communicated in terms. Daniel, remember, learned the language of Babylon, the learning of Babylon, learned the literature and the scholars and the information of Babylon. And so Daniel would have been somewhat familiar with much of what we see here, because much of it is sort of told or shown in images that sound and look a whole lot like what you would have seen in Babylonian myths and ancient Near Eastern myths. These monsters that come out of the sea and create chaos in the world, and the idea of the gods fighting against them and opposing them. That was all stuff that was prevalent in ancient Near Eastern mythology, and so Daniel is borrowing a lot of that language and a lot of that those images, and it makes it tough for us because that's not us, right? That's not our culture. I remember somebody one time suggesting, some of you maybe know the Beatles well enough to imagine what it would be like if several thousand years from now, somebody unearthed the lyrics to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and tried to make heads or tails out of that in their world and in their culture. And so, maybe that's a rough example that might give you some sense of what the struggle here is. That we're trying to deal with languages and images and tropes and kinds of literature that our world doesn't have a very good equivalent. So, best thing I know to do is just sort of dive in. So would somebody like to read Daniel 7, 1 through 8?
In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the son of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth, It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth speaking great things.
Okay, so 4, let's call them monsters, right? Beasts, 4 animals, but nothing like you've ever seen before. And where do they come from? The sea. The sea was a scary place in the ancient Near East. For one thing, it wasn't exactly beachfront property for most of Babylon. So the sea was this great unknown, right? People couldn't live out there. You'd drown if you fell out of your boat. There were storms, and there was, and just, I mean, who knows what was down there, right? And so the sea just became this image of chaos. It was uncontrollable. There was nothing you could do about what happened on the sea. And a lot of the mythology was about gods fighting the monsters of the sea to keep them from sort of overrunning the land where the people lived and creating chaos out of order out of this chaos. But what you have is these beasts coming out of the sea. The idea being that they're threatening. These are not friendly beasts. These are not beasts that you can use for work. These are frightening creatures that are coming to cause some sort of chaos. Horns are mentioned on the 4th beast particularly. Horns have to do often with ruling and that sort of thing, power. Does this sound like any vision we've seen before in Daniel?
No, Daniel. Maybe a Revelation.
Okay, Revelation, certainly there's some stuff that sounds very similar to this, right? But I would call your attention to the image, the dream about the image that Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 2. 4 things, right? 4 different metals. And what do those 4 metals represent? Kingdoms. So you got these 4 beasts coming out of the sea, and they're powerful, and they're the first one, interestingly, is given the mind of a human. What does that sound like to you from Daniel? Any connections there? Nebuchadnezzar was given the mind of a beast, and then it was reversed, right? The mind of a human was given back to him.
This version says the heart of a man.
Heart of a man, yeah. Heart, mind, it's same thing in Hebrew. It's representing the faculties,
Because we don't. I think normally we would separate the heart.
Yes,
and the mind.
we would.
In our culture.
In our way of
the mind is rational and the heart is more emotional. So that's a little confusing.
This Sunday we're going to be talking about purity of heart and the Beatitudes. And heart, though, in Jewish Old Testament and even in the New Testament, heart has to do, it's less about the emotions versus the logical faculties. It has to do with just sort of the center of who you are. This is what makes you you. This is the CPU, the central processing unit. It's the chip that makes you work is the heart. And so the heart of a person is given to this beast. It definitely sounds like and connects to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4 and his experience. So we'll look some more at some specifics about some of these beasts, but for now you get the picture, right? You've got these beasts coming. You've got some sort of connections to Daniel, and you're sort of seeing, maybe some themes starting to take shape. So let's sort of just keep that in our mind as we keep reading here. The fourth beast has these 10 horns, right? And what happens to the fourth beast while Daniel is watching? Sprouts another horn, which also, interestingly enough, uproots 3 other horns. So now you got a math problem. How many horns has he got now? I think it's 9, right? Lost 3 and gained 1, so that's 9. No, 8. We had 10 to start with. So he's got 8 horns now. But one of this little horn, what is this little horn? What's unusual about it? That you
His eyes
don't typically.
and talk.
It's got eyes and a mouth. It's a horn with eyes and a mouth that talks. And I think Allen's translation says it spoke great things.
This says boastfully.
Boastfully. It's a word that can mean, it literally means greatness, great things, but it can, depending on context, mean a couple of different things. And so NIV sort of assumes that we're talking about boastfulness.
Because that's more of a negative.
Right, exactly,
connotation.
exactly. So that's what we're looking at. That's the vision that Daniel sees. And then somebody read verses 9 through 14 for us.
As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated and the books were open. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
All right. So what happens as Daniel looks at this scene of these beasts coming?
God appears.
What's that?
God appears.
The Ancient of Days, reference to God, is actually also used to refer to the Canaanite god El, was sometimes called the Ancient of Days, or the Ancient One. So it's a reference to God, most certainly a reference to God. And what's God doing in this scene?
It's a courtroom scene.
It's a courtroom scene, right?
The judge.
He's the judge. It's a courtroom scene, and in this courtroom scene, what happens to these beasts and the horn that's speaking boastfully?
The books were open.
Books were open. The records, right? Probably talking about the kingdom, the record, official records of these kingdoms. The books are open, and what happens?
So the fourth beast was killed.
Fourth beast is killed.
The others they were allowed to live, but had no authority.
That had no, they're stripped of their authority and power. And then what? One like a son of man coming with the clouds of
Jesus.
well,
Yeah.
you're jumping ahead. Jesus uses the term son of man quite a bit. We're going to look at a spot in Matthew where I think they would have understood exactly what he was saying. But we'll get there. But yeah, this one, so one like a son of man, what does that mean if you're, forget that Jesus used that term for himself for a minute. What is one like a son of man? What would that mean to you?
Well, he's like a human,
He's like a human being.
but there's something off, something that makes Daniel say, well, he's like it, that's about all Daniel did.
It could be, though, that he's like a human being in contrast to what?
Beasts.
The beasts, right? There's these are the monsters, they're animal, they're beastly, but then there's one like a human who comes, one like a son of man who comes and what does he do? What happens?
Given all power.
He's all that power that was just taken away from these beasts, right? Plus, and then some, it probably seems like, is given to him. It's handed over to him. So that's the vision, right? Now, Daniel is sitting there thinking to himself, what's he thinking?
What did I just see?
What did I just see? What in the world does that mean? What in the world? And I just,
My coffee
you
this
know,
morning.
yeah, right, yeah. Somebody slipped me a little something, maybe. I'm not sure what's going on. And no, Daniel is probably used to seeing some visions. He's seen some of that or understood some of that. But he is troubled in spirit. So I approached one of those standing there. Now, suddenly there's somebody else standing there, right? Who's standing there, maybe? Well, we'll see. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The four great beasts are four kings that will rise from the earth, but the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. So that's the thumbnail interpretation, right, of the vision. By the way, not by the way, this is important. If that's the interpretation Daniel is given initially, some of the stuff that we get into trying to pin down what some of these images mean might be more than the text begins. Daniel is given a specific interpretation, and you gotta see that before we get into the rest of the stuff. So what is the short version elevator pitch interpretation that Daniel is given?
No matter how terrifying and powerful all these kingdoms are, God has authority over all of them.
Okay, the beasts are kings and kingdoms, because when you have a king, you have a kingdom. And they're gonna rise from the earth, these kingdoms, but the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever. What happens at the end of that vision, of the dream Nebuchadnezzar had of the image, the statue?
The stone came down.
The stone, right.
Destroyed.
A stone not made with hands crushes all that image, all the different kinds of metal in that image, crushes it to powder, rises to become a mountain that fills the whole earth. What you got here is a sort of a retelling of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but with different images. And that kingdom that the holy people of the Most High will receive. Who are the holy people of the Most High? For Daniel.
People of Israel.
Israel, right? Does Israel look like they're about to receive a kingdom in Daniel's time?
No, they lost their kingdom.
They lost. But the Most High, God, is going to take away that power and give it to his people. When Jesus prayed, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I mean, dang. The hope, right? You're living under the thumb of one empire after the other, one kingdom after. I mean, by this time, right, Israel has had, they started off in captivity in Egypt, right? And then they had a pretty good run there for a while, and then it was Assyria, and then it was Babylon, and then it was Persia. And there's more to come, right? We know that from history. And so it's just one after the other of these beastly kingdoms has been dominating God's people. But the vision is one of hope. Something's going to change. And what's going to change is God. What you said the other day, a week or two ago, about the thing that's, this is how I was, and this is how I am now, and the thing in between is Jesus, or it's God. It's what God does. And it transforms the way Israel's thinking of themselves. Now you got hope. This is apocalyptic. This is what apocalyptic literature does. It's written to people who are suffering and who are under the thumb of another king, another power, but it's a reminder of who's really in charge, who's really in control. But the beasts in the end are just, they're going to have to be accountable to the verdict of God and to his power. So what do you do if you're one of those people of the Most High? Well, you stay faithful, you stay true, you hang in there, you keep trying to sing the songs of Zion in a strange land, you keep trying to be true to your identity as God's holy people.
That's what Daniel did.
That's what he did.
Better see,
Right. That's what
probably the best lesson in the whole book.
that's what Daniel did. That's
I
what
was stood firm.
that's what the three friends did. That's the book. That's what Daniel's about. And these images, though they're strange, it's still about that. All right. So comments or questions up to verse 18.
I believe the beasts are based upon, except for the fourth one, based upon beasts would come into these cities, like, you know, some parts of the United States, you know, lions or bears come into the neighborhood and people don't want them.
Yeah. And what do you say about these kingdoms that they're compared to these beasts, right? Beasts out of the sea, chaos monsters, right? That are coming to, I mean, kingdoms are supposed to create some sort of order in the world, but there's a verdict here, right? These kingdoms aren't creating order. These kingdoms are creating chaos, pain, sorrow, suffering. And they're going to be accountable for it. They're going to have to answer for it. I think this is a real good chapter for an election.
The horn is based upon powerful animals like ox, ram. They're powerful animals.
Yeah.
So, you know, horn becomes a symbol for power.
It often
like
does.
Power.
Often does in the Old Testament. You know, raise up my horn. You know, the psalmist prays to God. The idea being, give me some power, give me some strength. I've got nothing, but I need you. I trust you to give me some power. Yeah. But one of these beasts, as you point out, Michael, is not like the others. That Sesame Street, one of these things is not the other. One of these things is not like the other. So what's different about the fourth beast? One thing, it's not really described in terms like it's like a leopard or like a bear or like, you know, it's not really described in those kinds of terms. It's much different. It's got iron teeth and bronze claws.
Bionic.
Bionic, yeah, right. It's a cyborg of some sort. You know, right. That doesn't occur in nature, we're saying. This is something else again. And it's got this horn. And so Daniel, while I'm sure he's appreciative of the overall message, Daniel wants to know a little more about this fourth beast. Verse 20, I also want to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up before, which 3 of them fell. A horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It'll be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He'll subdue 3 kings. He'll speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. So, this fourth kingdom is different somehow, and the horn is more specific. But what's the outcome?
It's the court, the judgment takes away its power.
Still the same, right? It's the outcome's still the same. But this horn is going, and what seems to be different, and what seems to be emphasized at least, and so what I think the difference is the direct oppression of God's people, right? The direct, now, Babylon, Persia, so far the Jews had, while they I'm sure suffered at times, and there was intermittent persecution. We've seen that in the book of Daniel so far, these sort of intermittent times of where their faith sort of clashed with what was going on in the world around them. This one king seems to be more specifically opposed to God's people, fighting a war against them, right? Speaking against God and trying to change the set times and the laws, probably sacrifice and that sort of thing, and the law of Moses. And the holy people will be delivered into his hands for a while. However long time and half a time, times and half a time is. Some people say it's 3.5 years, 1 year, 2 year, plural 2 years, and then a half a year. Problem with that is not what it says. And so there's probably some gray area, some room for some wiggle room there. But for a certain length of time, and that's really the point, right? For this certain length of time, God's people will suffer and be persecuted, but God will deliver and give the kingdom over to them. Turn the tables, right? You'll pull down the rulers and raise up the So, there's a lot of thought about which kingdoms these are. And a lot of difference of opinion. I've spent longer than I meant to this week, kind of wading through some of the difference of opinion about what these kingdoms represent. It comes down to 2 or 3 different possibilities, probably, and maybe a fourth one that I think I like best. You could look at it as from a simply historical point of view, right? We know it was Babylon, we know it was Persia, we know it was Greece that came next with Alexander the Great, and we know it was Rome that came after that. That has the advantage for Christians, that schema has the advantage for Christians that it was during the time of Rome that Jesus came and brought the kingdom of God into, brought human beings into the kingdom and proclaimed the kingdom of God is near and set up this kingdom that will last forever in the days of those kings. That's a pretty, that for Christians is a pretty attractive way of reading it. Some people will say it's Babylon, it's the Medes, and then the Persians, because the Medes and the Persians sort of came together first in sort of a conglomerate of kingdoms. Remember Darius the Mede? We have reference to Darius the Mede as a king in Daniel. And then that leaves us with Greece as the fourth kingdom, the fourth beast. The advantage of that is you've got the little horn that rises up, and we know about a king named Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, the God made manifest is what he called himself. Talk about speaking boastfully and speaking against God. And we know that he changed the laws in Israel and Jerusalem. He prevented sacrifices. He went into the kingdom, went into the temple and intentionally defiled it so that offerings couldn't be made. If you've ever heard of Judas Maccabee and the Maccabean revolt, that was against Antiochus, against his policies. So that's a pretty convenient way to look at it as well. So some people will say it's that. One of the problems I have with that is the Medes never really dominated Israel specifically. They were by the time they were in charge, the Persians were sort of the ascendant kingdom and the more dominant kingdom, which also fits with the bear that's kind of higher on one side. It's a weird phrase, but perhaps that's what's in view. Possibly it's some combination of all of those, with just the added idea that, kingdoms come, kingdoms go. By the time of Jesus, certainly people were applying some things in Daniel that the Israelites suffering under Antiochus would have found pretty comforting. By Jesus' day, they were applying those things to Rome. We'll see an example of that in the next chapter. There are probably other ways to sort of think about it and sort of hash it out. But those are the general sort of the general ways that scholars seem to do it. I'm happy with whatever you come up with. That's fine with me. Because again, the point is not that we need to figure out beyond the shadow of a doubt which kingdom is which. The point is the one like the Son of Man comes. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. Because in Daniel 7, that seems to represent Israel. Those beasts represent a kingdom, different kingdoms. The one like a human being seems to represent Israel. The contrast being, that's what a human being is supposed to be, right? That's what a human being is supposed to be, devoted to God and one of the people of God. Jesus takes on that terminology for himself, and it's kind of interesting that he does. What's a term Jesus could have chosen for himself? It would have been pretty logical.
King.
Title. What's that?
King.
King, or as might have been said in Hebrew, Messiah. Jesus didn't really choose. He didn't deny that. He didn't say he wasn't the Messiah. And the fact that in Greek, throughout the Old Testament, or the New Testament, he's referred to as a Jesus Christos, Jesus Christ, Jesus the Messiah. Obviously, that's a role he accepted, but he didn't go calling himself Messiah. What he went around calling himself was Son of Man, which is interesting that he did. Turn to Matthew 20. Matthew 26, is it? Yeah, 26. And let's see, let's look at verse 62 and following. Matthew 26, somebody read 62 through 68.
And the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said so," Jesus replied. "But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? He is worthy of death," they answered. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you?"
So I want to bring this up because Jesus went around calling himself Son of Man. And honestly, you could hear Son of Man if you were a Jewish person, a Hebrew speaker, Aramaic speaker, and just think Jesus meant human being, right? And Ezekiel is called Son of Man throughout his prophecy. It was a term that would have had some people have known about Daniel, but it's a term that had a little bit of ambiguity to it until Jesus stands in front of the Sanhedrin, the court of Israel, right? And quotes Daniel. You'll see the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. What's he saying? What's he
I'm
saying?
Messiah, he's saying it.
And more specifically, what's he saying?
Well, he's the fulfillment of this prophecy.
And these guys who are sitting in judgment on him, the tables have just been turned, right? Remember, it's a courtroom scene in Daniel. So it's really sort of the mic drop for Jesus, if I can use that phrase. And they react just exactly as you'd expect. They freak out because he's just placed the Jewish high court in the same boat as all these beasts from Daniel. They're on the wrong side. He's on the right side of it. And so God is gonna set things right. It winds up being a very powerful image that Jesus uses to talk about God's kingdom and exactly what Daniel looked forward to, and talk about how God's kingdom stands against all the tyranny and the oppression of these other kingdoms, Rome or Israel, for that matter, whoever it is.
Royalty. No, I just say Jesus declared his royalty.
Yeah. He declared that he's a part of that kingdom, and he's receiving the kingdom for God's people, right? On behalf of God's people, and so what he's always been saying about the kingdom, right? When he came preaching and saying about himself is he uses Daniel there to sort of nail it down for them, let them see exactly what he's getting at, what he's saying to them.
It seems like he makes it really clear, saying he's the Most High
Yeah.
King, the Most High God. Is this God? I might forget. Yeah.
See the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, coming on clouds of heaven. That's pretty unambiguous all of a sudden, right? Other comments, questions, thoughts about Daniel 7 at this point?
I've been back and forth. When I first started studying Daniel a few years ago, some years ago, probably about 10 years ago, and I even asked I had an email exchange with my Hebrew professor, and he anyways, the I understand the Greek view, but what they're trying to say, but I couldn't accept it because, okay, I agree with you that the kingdom was established at the time of Rome's strength, not his weakness. And so that the picture of the fourth king doesn't look too much like the history as we understand it.
Yeah, I think I think part of it too is the next chapter has a couple of more beasts, right? And one of them specifically is said, well, it's said who they are, Persia and Greece in the next chapter. And the horn in that chapter comes from Greece, which Antiochus. In this chapter, it's a little more uncertain.
And they weren't able to, and I reread what they had to say, but you didn't give me, not you specifically, I should say, they did not give, there was nothing in their works to sit there and support that the kingdom was supposed to come at the time of Greece.
Right. I mean,
So
that's
I'm like, okay, fine, it's Greece, support it, support your answer with the kingdom is supposed to come at the time of Greece.
as Christians, I think we see that and we tend to think Rome, and I understand that. And again, I think it's very possible that it's going to depend on how you see these, how you read these things, and what you bring to it, and you know when you are. I think in Daniel's time, they would have had no doubt about, well, not Daniel's time, but in the time of Antiochus, they would have had no doubt about who that horn was. I think they'd had I think they'd have been certain that horn was Antiochus, both in 7 and 8. We read it maybe a little differently because we're seeing it from the other side, and we know kind of how history played out. That's why this is the way Scripture works, and especially apocalyptic. It can shift, and what you think the meaning that you attribute to some of these images can shift depending on where you are and how you're looking at it, what's going on around you. And that's I think some of the power of apocalyptic, that it can do that. It can be used in that way. That doesn't mean that every cockamamie interpretation that anybody ever comes up with is valid. It just means that this is the way it works. This is the way the images work, and you can read it from a historic perspective, but you can also read it from a different kind of perspective, a perspective of if you're suffering under Antiochus, you got no doubt who that horn is and who that fourth beast is.
Maybe it's the same for us today, like we're not suffering under a kingdom, but we're suffering like under Satan's kingdom. And so maybe that's what I was gonna ask. I didn't know if we could read it, because Jesus says, from now on, you will see the Son of Man. So maybe it's like in Colossians, Paul says that he disarms the spiritual powers and authorities
Yes.
by triumphing over them at the cross. So maybe like how the Jews would have read it during the Maccabean revolt, it's the same thing for us today, even though we're not struggling under an earthly king. It's a spiritual warfare.
I mean, I certainly Jesus saying from now on. I mean, and what's going to happen? They think they've won, right? He's going to be executed. They think it's done. And Jesus is saying from now on, you're going to see me coming on the clouds of heaven, sitting at the side at the right hand of the mighty one. I mean, yeah, it's not coming out the way you think it's going to come out, because of what's happened in the cross and in the resurrection. What's going on?
I didn't know.
I think that's very, very a very good way to look at it and think about it. I do think too. I mean, to me, I read this and I think a little differently about the government I'm living under or the party I'm living under. I have some different. I see it differently because of the way Daniel pictures governments, kingdoms, power in the world. The power that often we think is going to bring order winds up bringing more chaos. And people who the government should be helping are crushed underfoot. Yeah, I mean, it changes the way I see the government we live under and the world we live in. Because, yes,
Would you say that the government we live under is antichrist?
oh, I think they can be. I think there's a lot of antichrists. I think it's a mistake to sort of pin some of the New Testament literature down as saying there's one antichrist that's coming, and we got, Left, like you remember the Left Behind series, that there's one guy that's going to rise to the top of the world and he's the antichrist. But certainly antichrist just means opposed to Christ, against Christ, and certainly sometimes government can do that, whether our own or others, and sometimes it's overt and sometimes it's not so overt.
So I just came down with the conclusion, to take it typologically, that Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 fit exactly what the New Testament teaches. The world's defeated, Christ takes the throne, and in the end, the saints will receive the kingdom. In the end, the kingdom is now, and yet we inherit the kingdom as long as we're faithful.
This is our hope, right? It's not in a political system. It's not in our own power or strength. I ran across a quote from an activist group this week, and I think we need a church that's willing to do anything and everything to get to the point where we reclaim that which was stolen from us. I'm going to read it again. We need a church that's willing to do anything and everything to get to the point where we reclaim, we being Christians in America, reclaim that which was stolen from us. Well, no. If to do anything and everything to win is about as far from Christ as I can imagine.
He doesn't identify what was stolen from us.
He didn't identify what was stolen. Because guess what? It's rhetoric, right? It's a way of whatever you think was stolen from you, you can put in that phrase and let that carry it, But that's not. I mean, we know. I think even whatever your party is, I think we know that's not our call as Christians. That's not what because that's not who we belong to. That's not the kingdom we're a part of. Doesn't mean we don't care about what happens in our country, that we have nothing to do with it. Although some Christians have certainly decided that's what it means, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. That's up to you. But certainly our hope is in that we're going to receive the kingdom through Jesus. That's our hope. That's what we look forward to. That's our loyalty. And Daniel reiterates that over and over again. It's a drumbeat that goes all the way through this book. We'll see it in the next vision too, chapter 8.
Just a clarification on the Antichrist issue. There's the term Antichrist, and there's also the term pseudo-Christ. They seem to be used similarly, but they do suggest that the Antichrist is not just somebody who is opposed to Christ, but who deceives people into thinking that he is the chosen one, the anointed one. Thus, the power of the Antichrist is presumably that even Christians might be misled.
Buy into it. Yep.
And buy into it. So that's an interesting parallel in today's society. I don't think anyone in the United States government right now, or the government as a whole, fits that particular mold. Just as an institution, it seems to be more of a person who misleads people. So
that's certainly a danger that we can all sort of fall into.
And that's the picture we get in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
Yeah.
That's another time.
Right. Yeah, please, let's don't try that.
But this pseudo Christ, antichrist is oftentimes associated with the little horn. So, and the beast of the sea in Revelation. So it is cogent to what we're talking about.
Again, these
Right.
images can be, used and reinterpreted and often are. Jesus is going to reinterpret, I think, a pretty important one that comes up not in chapter 8, chapter 9, I think, in Daniel. We'll talk about it when we get there. He kind of, I think, reinterprets a pretty important one from Daniel for something going on in his day. And so, I mean, all of
Right.
this.
Which is why we can try to pinpoint some of this stuff, but actually isn't the more interesting thing in that in this fallen world, that nonetheless to which God has some ultimate say, we are told that this is something that will be allowed to happen. So we have been warned. So we should use some care as to who we how we follow people, lest we depart from it's very easy in the current climate to lose your compass, and so you're not pointing always at Jesus, but you start to get off course by focusing on an ideology or a single idea or this, that, or the other, and that then becomes your God, essentially. And this is a long time coming, right? I mean, we talked about the Pilgrim's Progress, right? The pilgrim sometimes moves across the path because the other path seems like it's a better option to the goal, but it's not. So this is throughout history. This is something that I think Christians have needed to take care about.
We have always had that tendency, I think.
Yeah. And the other side of that, Ron, is the fear that can come within the hearts of those of us who are Christians. We see what appears to be or could be the Antichrist raising up. Like, is that really going to happen? And we have to be reminded to go back. At least I have to be reminded to say God is in control. And my work is to do exactly what you're saying, to stay focused about being in God's comfort, and He's going to take care of us. And that's the ultimate, and not to let fear of whatever you want to call something that's so in contrast of what and how you believe.
Yeah, I was just talking, I've been talking to several people about current events, and there's a lot of turmoil and things going on, and I see people getting bogged down with worry about it. Well,
you're right. Yeah.
Even from a non-Christian standpoint, getting all worried about stuff that you have no control over, is you can do what you can do, but ultimately we have to realize that we have limited thing, and we do have God, as you said. So if we do have these anxieties and stuff, take it to God and recognize that, that's what we're supposed to do, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is it time? It's 8:30. Thanks, Linda.
Good night.
Like, it's bedtime.
Way to go.
Enjoy this.
Good night, everybody.